Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Grice. I'm the host of your show today. I also have two guests on the show today, Jazmine Coates, and I'll let Charlie introduce himself.
I'm Charles Petroff. I'm an attorney at Access Living, and I focus on Americans with Disabilities Act litigation.
And today, the topic for our show is paratransit and how it affects the disability movement. So I'm going to ask two questions to Charlie first. And my first question is, when did paratransit start?
You didn't feed me that question before the interview. I'm not sure I have the best answer, but I can tell you that it became a legal requirement when the ADA was passed in 1990. The ADA basically said that if you're operating a public transportation system, in our region, that would be the Chicago Transit Authority or Pace Suburban Bus, you have to also provide for paratransit as the disability accommodation to allow people who couldn't otherwise use mainline transportation. So at least since 1990, it's been mandated by federal law.
Who runs the paratransit system?
In the Chicagoland area, it's run by Pace Suburban Bus. And that's based on a local agreement. That's not normal. Originally, in the intent of the law, each transit authority would run its own paratransit service. So the CTA would have run a paratransit service for the city of Chicago, and Pace would have run the paratransit service for the suburban area that Pace covers. However, decades ago, the two, CTA and Pace, got together and they decided they would have Pace run the entire area's paratransit service. So Pace now has a paratransit service area, I understand, to be roughly the size of the state of Connecticut.
Very interesting. Now we're going to switch to Jazmine for a moment. Jazmine, I would like for you to give a situation that you've recently had with Pace Paratransit.
Recently, okay. Just yesterday, I set up my transportation to go to my link office. I get to my link office yesterday, and my link office was closed. I had no idea that my link office would be closed because nobody told me that my link office was closed. So by my link office being closed, I got stuck into the vehicle. Well, not stuck into the vehicle, but I got into the vehicle. I was in the vehicle and I had to turn back around and go back home. And I had to pay another fare for my pace ride for them taking me back home.
Okay. Thank you for that scenario. Charlie, what are some of the biggest problems that you hear from writers that need to be improved on with pace?
Well, actually, despite the fact that I have received many complaints about PACE, I actually think the place to start is that most riders are really quite easygoing about the entire process. Paratransit is an extremely difficult way to travel. You have to reserve your ride a day in advance. You have to be waiting at a particular time for the pre-scheduled ride. You have to find a way to meet up with the driver to make sure that you get driven. As Jazmine's story just indicated, there's no way to sort of adapt to the conditions as you find them on the day that you actually travel because everything is scheduled 24 hours in advance. There are basics like right now, PACE defines an on-time pickup to be a pickup within 30 minutes of the time they scheduled for you. The system isn't designed to be a system that you could really use in today's world. The system is designed as if it's at least better than nothing, not as if it's an actual competitive way to get by, to keep a job, to keep your medical appointments, to keep your other engagements. So I would start by arguing that most paratransit riders really don't complain a whole lot. They accept that there are major limitations on the system. But with those major limitations, there are things that become sort of a crisis. It's not like if you miss your paratransit ride, you just wait for the next bus to come down the street. There's never a next bus. These are individual door-to-door rides. So in that scenario, there's no backup plan. There's no alternative. And what becomes really difficult are things like pickup times. Because PACE can get very far behind in coming to get someone. And if they got that far behind, that means you won't get to your destination on time. You can't make your appointment. You may not be seen by your doctor. The office might be closed where you're trying to visit. Or what happens to a lot of people, you get trapped at your doctor's office for hours as you wait for a vehicle to come and pick you up after your appointment. So pickup times is a very sort of common and very frequent complaint. After that, there is some talk about the behavior of the drivers. I think the system is frustrating on many levels. Drivers get frustrated and sometimes they don't act as they probably would want to. And, in the rides, this is a small vehicle, like you're close. It's not like the driver at the front of the CTA train. If you wanted to yell at that driver, you really even couldn't. But, people are face to face with each other as they deal with the frustrations of the system. After that, you start to get into issues of like the vehicles. The vehicles right now have a very bumpy ride. They frequently have problems with the lifts. And if you use a motorized wheelchair, you probably can't board the vehicle without the lift working. They are larger than the last set of vehicles, so they can't actually enter many places. They can't enter many places where they're supposed to be in order to pick people up or drop people off.
Yes, and I would like to give a scenario that myself and some of my colleagues have been told that due to the nature of the mobility device that we use. We should have never been certified to use paratransit because our mobility devices don't meet the ADA standards. I've been told this numerous times by various pay staff that work for the paratransit program because I've had difficulty sitting in a position that's required for me to access the vehicles. So that's a common problem. And I think another one of the common problems is the reservationists are constantly asking passengers to quickly give out their information when they're booking a reservation. So the information does not get properly put into the system. So it might be the wrong pickup time, it might be the wrong address, might be the wrong drop-off point. But what can we do to alleviate some of the small problems like that? What would you say to that?
The first step of addressing a public entity is bringing together a group of people who have the same concerns and want to see the same fixes. And when an individual makes a complaint, it's taken seriously, but it's often considered to be like a one-time problem. We'll fix it for this time, it won't happen again. When a group brings a complaint, it's seen to be a request to make a change in the system. And there is, I believe right now, almost a cultural issue between the riders and the administrators for paratransit. Because the situations you mentioned, a rider like you, Michael, what you're asking PACE to do is to accommodate your particular disability. That as a person with a disability, there are some things about it that require some unique amount of accommodation. Often what I hear from PACE is that all they have to do is follow the federal law. They don't have to make additional changes that would accommodate particular disabilities. The way that your chair is built, that's a great example. It's true, PACE didn't buy vehicles that were designed to accommodate that particular chair because you have a box that goes out in front of your feet. It extends the size of your chair beyond an average motorized chair. But the federal law also says that public entities are supposed to accommodate disabilities so long as it's reasonable. And we know that you ride PACE, so it is definitely possible to accommodate your chair because it's happened. And, they're really, that's really the front of the fight. Is PACE going to accept that it does a complicated and difficult job, but its focus is on being able to get people with disabilities public transportation that is usable and effective? Or is its job only to live up to what the minimum requirements in the federal law are? Same thing with your scheduling. If PACE is trying to deliver a service at a certain price point and doesn't want to spend extra money on extra time on the phone, that tension is understandable, but at the end of the day, the question is it really trying to move people with disabilities through our area in a way that is effective and usable, or is it just trying to do that minimum level of required activity? Because the minimum level is the cheaper level, but it isn't the kind of thing that many people I work with find sufficient to build an actual life with.
Thank you. Now, we know that myself and Jazmine and you have taken part in hearings. We've done testimonies locally, statewide, and we have not been effective enough to really make the changes that I feel we need to make. So, what other alternatives are there?
Well, some groups right now have focused on new federal legislation. That does seem to be a difficult ask. But I do think it calls into question the whole idea of whether or not this should be more of a national movement. Because the federal paratransit rules are rules that apply across the country. They're not working for anyone. They're not just failing here in our area. They're difficult for everyone. But locally, PACE administration has, in different phases, listened to this community either more closely or less closely. And we have a new executive director at PACE. And it's time, I think, for that dialogue to explore whether or not these issues will be heard and addressed, at least to the extent they can be. But, you know, to have the best conversation, we should have the most people concerned involved in that conversation. And this particular, meeting here, other meetings, we need to bring our community together to focus on our chief issues.
Jazmine, would you by any chance have another scenario that you can give?
A lot of times when the driver does come to my house in these big vehicles, a lot of them do not like to get out of the vehicle. They want to sit in the vehicle and just have dispatchers call to have you come out. When it says in the comments that they need to make contact and they need to ring the doorbell. Now, I've been having to give them the code to my doorbell so that they would be able to ring it. Some drivers, they do ring it. Some drivers, they don't. Some drivers want to just sit there and think that, and hope that there's a miracle coming out. I hope that it's going to be a miracle to come outside when your ride pulls up.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that, okay, when there's more people onto the vehicle, I don't know exactly of when I'm going to get dropped off at my destination, because there's people before me that are getting dropped off. Now, if I remember correctly, it said it was only one person. It was supposed to be only one person per I think the pickups were only one person per that gets picked up and dropped off to their destination due to the COVID due to the COVID-19. But now they are starting to put people into the vehicle together all over. They're starting to put people into the vehicle together all over again. And they're not basically social distancing us because this COVID-19 is still out here. That's just the way how I'm looking at it.
Thank you for that. And I have a concern about the literature that PACE sends out. People with disabilities have different ways that they need to read information that's sent to them. Some people with disabilities need it in large print. Some people may need it in Braille, but it's not done that way. So those individuals have no way of knowing what's being presented to them. Charlie, how can we change that?
Well, we should demand it. It is required that they produce their materials in accessible formats. Most of PACE's material is online. And I think their predominant vision is that we're supposed to go to our computers and think to look up their forms and their manuals online, and then use our own computers, additional software to make it accessible to us. But I don't believe computers are that well distributed amongst the community that uses space. And that's an issue that I think we, as our side of the community, can really advance.
I agree that I think we need to do more on the policy side. And I've basically been saying that for a while. Because when we do things at the state level, it just gets pushed by the wayside. That's just my perspective. But I also think that we need to get a lot of our allies part of this conversation to see what their concerns and issues are. Because there's perhaps consumers and organizations that we have not reached out to just to see what their concerns may be, and if we can formulate a partnership with some of those organizations and groups that we have not reached out to.
I'd actually encourage us to go a step further. PACE recently issued a strategic plan completely re-envisioning the way it will provide mainline bus service across the Chicago region. But that strategic plan had only a few words about paratransit, and none of them were about re-envisioning the system. I think it's time for us to push past the victory from 1990 and to look at how we could actually build a really effective disability transportation service in our community. One that lets people not spend hours of each day waiting in the effort to not miss a ride. One that gets you to work on time and picks you up from work on time. One that lets you get your groceries done, lets you take care of your financial business, and doesn't cost an incredible investment of additional time. We have parents trying to use paratransit to keep a job and raise their children. And quite frankly, it just doesn't work.
Right.
The rest of the community can use public transportation to do those things, but it's impossible with paratransit because of its structure. And there's no clear mandatory next step, but I think it's our time to start to talk through which way we want this to improve, the strategic plan for paratransit, the new vision for a new transportation future. That's something that we should put together and then advance in whatever political forum is most appropriate.
I have a question, Charlie. Does that also mean by giving it back to CTA? Because clearly, I'm just going to see it like this. Clearly, I don't think Pace can handle the pressure of all of these vehicles. I do remember before when Pace took over, it was the zoning. Before Pace took over, it was the zoning, and I guess that was complicated as well too. But then when Pace said that they were no longer going to do the zoning anymore, now it's like, okay, you got this one, you call one number to book your trip, and then they dispatch the trip out to you. They dispatch which company is going to be coming out to you. So I just want to know, is Pace kind of just giving up right now on this whole paratransit thing?
Jazmine, I don't think Pace is giving up. I think they just see their job as meeting these minimum guidelines set in the law.
Right.
And they're working hard to meet those minimum guidelines. But what I feel like I see is that those minimum guidelines aren't enough. If we want to hold down jobs and we're using paratransit, we're eventually going to lose that job because it's going to get us to work late too many times. That's the simple crux of the matter for me. So if you want to work, you want to get an education, you want to do regular health maintenance activities, eventually Pace will get you there late so often you won't be able to do it.
Okay, I'd like to thank you. We need to wrap up today. It's been a very informative show. So I'd like to thank Charlie and Jazmine. This is Michael Grice. I'm signing off. Thank you for watching our show today.
Thank you for inviting me, Michael.